This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1060. It's Book of the Month Club, Spider-Man, Origin of the Hobgoblin. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. I'm joined by a special co-host, Nathan Struck. Nathan, how are you today?
I'm at least co-host. I can be guests. Hi, I'm Nathan.
Sometimes you're a guest, sometimes you're a co-host. So today, our regularly scheduled programming is to talk about the Clone Saga. That is being postponed because our brother-in-arms did not do the required reading on time. So we're pushing it back. And then next month, we're probably going to be doing something more Halloween-themed for the Book of the Month Club. So it may be a while before we revisit the world of clones, but we're going to...
I'm sorry. I apologize, but is it a clone sponement? That's awful. No, I take it back. That was stupid. I don't like puns, but maybe someone enjoyed that.
I love that more than I should have.
Okay.
But we're gonna stay in the realm of Spider-Man. So we're gonna talk about the origin of the Hobgoblin, specifically the three Roger Stern stories, or story arcs, I guess, featuring the Hobgoblin that are featured in Amazing Spider-Man 238 to 239, 244 to 245, and 249 to 251. Now there was originally about a decade ago an Origin of the Hobgoblin trade paperback, which also included like 3 issues of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, like 43 and 47 to 48. They have the character of Roderick Kingsley. They're obviously his headcanon, but at the time, it's hard to tell that would have ever been eventually the Hobgoblin, so we skipped those. And then there was another issue, Spectacular Spider-Man 85, where we actually see the Hobgoblin do the experiment that gives him the super strength of the Green Goblin. I also kind of skipped those and just kept to the Roger Stern stuff, or I should say the Roger Stern Amazing Spider-Man stuff. So Nate, obviously, you know of my love of the Hobgoblin and all the intricacies behind the characters, comic book publication history, etc. But had you ever read any of these stories before?
No. And I guess I gotta say it on the air here. You're maybe not gonna like it, Adam. I finally really get why you love the Hobgoblin. This is really good stuff.
Tricked you. See, you did trick me.
The identity of my message was switched at the last second, and you didn't know what it was, and that's mostly what this seems to be. But in a fun way, this hasn't gone too far yet. This is not at the point of exhaustion of like, who is he, who isn't he? So this is just a tremendous amount of fun. Really love Roger Stern on this. This is some of my favorite Roger Stern stuff I've ever read, and it's such... Like, I'm so into what he presents here that by the time we get to Amazing 251, and now it's plotted by Stern and the script is done by DeFalco. Actually, DeFalco, it's noticeable. It's not as crisp. It's not as it doesn't run at the same clip. It's kind of a little bit overly verbose. It's not as good. I like DeFalco and other stuff, but it just was interesting that was notable. That Stern was so enjoyable that not quite as enjoyable at the end there.
It's interesting. I think probably what that might have been is that because you have Tom DeFalco doing a script over a plot that wasn't his, that's probably part of it. Like, it may not have felt as natural. He was the previous editor of the book, so he was editing the book and Roger Stern was writing it. So obviously they were like, understood what was going on, but now he's writing the book and that is the difference. So that might have been why it may at first not feel as crisp. I do think Tom really hones his craft later and really knows who Spider-Man is. But especially at this point, Roger Stern's been writing the book for at least 2 years. He's really got it down. And not only does he have it down, like, this is a great version of Spider-Man because Peter has a life and there's other characters and there's subplots and there's a lot of meaty stuff going on. And yes, the front and center is this emergence of this new villain, but there's a lot of other stuff too that kind of keeps you going. And so, like, actually my question for you is that, by doing this, we kind of jumped around a little bit. Did this make you want to go back and like read 241 to 243 or read 246 to 248? Like, did it, kind of spark an interest in trying to fill in those gaps at all?
Yeah, I want to read all of this stuff. I mean, we've talked, maybe mostly off the air about my plans for my Spider-Man epic collection, what I'm going to get. And I think, up to this point, I had read Kraven's Last Hunt and stuff around that. And then, a bunch of the Todd McFarlane stuff, and then of course mostly into the 90s and Bagley and all that stuff. And that I always just I had heard for years. My best friend in junior school and elementary school I went to his whatever birthday party. It must have been maybe 7th or 8th birthday party, and they were giving away comics as party favors. And so I was just like, wow. And I think at the time it was a jury issue that I got, which actually doesn't make sense now. It doesn't line up with my life. Anyway, it must have been a different issue. But I remember going up to his room and he was showing me his comic book collection. And he was telling me that like Spider-Man is the best book. It's the coolest book. And so a lot of the stuff he had were things that were from like the late 80s, early 90s. And you've talked about your love of like 80s Spider-Man. And I've really been enjoying 80s X-Men stuff and X content. And just so for my favorite Marvel books, the X universe and the Spider-Man universe, I just decided I think I'll do the 80s epics. So I have been waiting. I mean, I have Ghosts of the Past, right? That's like one of the epics most, one of the earlier 80s epics, but I want to get them all. Yeah, I'd love to get all the Roger Stern stuff at this point. And I'm really enjoying this early John Romita Jr. as well. So you're right, the soap opera stuff, all the different characters, supporting characters. I don't even know that much about, like, I know that they're college friends and best friends, he and Harry, but only a few issues of this, and I'm already sad that they eventually make him go Green Goblin-y and crazy and he dies, because he's really a good supporting character. And then the MJ thing going on and Liz, and it's just, you know, the city is a character as well that is constantly referenced, and Romita does great renditions of skyscrapers and brownstones and water towers, and they're referencing the street names. Like Stern feels like he lives there. I'm pretty sure he did, right? And I get the feeling like I kind of live there. Everything feels lived in. Just really good Spider-Man soap opera. So I'm absolutely in to read more, but I'd really like to read it on paper.
Yeah, that's right. I did make to read digitally, so not your preferred format.
No, but still enjoyable.
So let's get into the JR of it all, because it's really interesting seeing, like, we've a number of different issues here, and I think in every issue he had a different inker. Like there's constant fluctuation, and it's really interesting to see. You know, he hasn't become the JR we know yet. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist. So we have this very early kind of proto JR in terms of how we interpret him, especially on Spider-Man. So, I mean, he's been drawing the book at this point for a couple of years, but, you know, he hasn't gone through that mid-80s maturation that becomes what we see on Daredevil. Like, when you look at his Daredevil stuff, that feels more akin to his modern work. This is different.
You see it the most in the Hobgoblin, the renditions of the Hobgoblin costume and the mask. There's a lot of what will later become easy to spot or stylistic of Romita Jr. Who designed the costume? Who designs originally the Hobgoblin costume?
I think it was JR.
That'd be really cool. I mean, it's a great redesign. Like, I've always liked the design. It's always been my favorite Goblin design, even though I'm a big fan of Phil Urich and McDaniel's. All new, all different, if you want to call it Green Goblin. But, yeah, it's just the little cape and the changes to the mask and the hood and the chainmail armor. Like, all of it is just really solid. I've always loved it.
So apparently it looks like here that Stern recounted that he directed JR to base the costume on the Green Goblins, but to make it a little more medieval looking. While Romita asserts that he was given no direction beyond using the Green Goblin as a basis. But it was chiefly his design.
Great. Yeah. I mean, kudos to him. This is great. I mean, I know Paul loves the Phoenix Buster Iron Man armor the most. That is, obviously very ironically said, but, this is solid stuff. I love it. And hey, I also love his Nimrod. Like, he's done a bunch of things that are very iconic, and, they're not always blocky like a Nimrod. This is got a stealth style to it most of the time.
What's interesting, and what I really like about the overall design is that the cape really works well for this character.
Yeah.
Like which is interesting when you look at Phil Urich, he starts to have a cape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, out of control, ratty, kind of batty winged cape, which I think is kind of cool, for him in that way too. But I love that it gets snagged on a lot of things. It's too long and he gets grabbed by it several times. This is like a nice little, short medievally style cape. Really understood the assignment. And then just the deep red eyes, right? And all you can do with those eyes, and you have it in shadow with the hood. And just the rendering, the kind of the surreal, almost grody, very dirty kind of seeming, lines in the mask, that he draws. Just, it's super cool.
So the first issue we end up reading here, we have John Romita inked by his dad. And so it's a really interesting visual aesthetic to kind of jump into because, you can really feel his dad in a lot of it.
Yeah. It's very clean. It's very, it's really like pulling his son almost into his arms.
Yeah.
And the way he inks him. Yeah.
And what I like about the original Origin is that it's all Peter's fault, like with most things, like if he hadn't let the one guy go, he wouldn't have found the cachet and it wouldn't have sold it to this guy who becomes the Hobgoblin. Like, I really like that, and they don't weigh on it too much that, like, Peter kind of knows that's probably what happened, but he doesn't really express it that much. But as a reader, we know, and it's a nice way of kind of, showing that great responsibility and how you can't let that one person go. And later on, I think in actually something that we're going to be talking about probably in a couple months on the Clone Saga podcast, is that there is a one shot where he mentions to MJ, I think he does mention MJ that he let that guy get away and that's why the Hobgoblin exists. So, his sins keep coming back to haunt him.
But the way this is drawn so expertly, and the ink, and not just the inking, but the colors as well. Like once whatever page this is, I don't know, I'm not going to be able to count the page, and there's no page here on Marvel Unlimited, but he's upside down descending into the tunnel, and there's just like gross water, putrid water pouring off of the ceiling and the walls. It's cavernous. Actually, it's not. It's actually very tight corridors with lots of tunnels leading out, and it's this, I don't know, on my screen, it's this kind of browny, green, gross coloration, and he's talking about how it smells, and then the next page, there's a shot of, again, how enclosed the tunnels are, how his head's almost grazing against the sewer water, and he's shining his spider light, and great shot of is this Lefty who's hiding from him?
No, this is Georgie.
Georgie. I knew it was an E at the end of the name. So Georgie, just like the way that he's looking terrified and pressed up against the wall, it just seems so unpleasant. Like I side with him. I can see why I wouldn't want to crawl into this. I can see the rationalization. There's other people that I have to apprehend and take care of. Do I go after the one and maybe risk the other one's getting away? Also, this is disgusting. Like, I get it. So it's not Spider-Man being irresponsible. I think he's just making the best choice he can. And how could he possibly have known the chain of events, right, that lead from A to B to C, right? True,
but he's Spider-Man, and this is what happens every time.
For sure. I can see that as being important. It does increase the drama. But I agree with him, though.
I also think it's interesting that because it's his dad doing the inking, when you have the page of, like, Aunt Anna is calling Aunt May and they have a conversation on the phone, like, that is pure Senior. Like, I don't even see Junior in there. Like, those faces, like seeing Aunt Anna, seeing, even MJ kind of walking into the shot, like, that's not JR. That's Senior all the way.
Yeah. It's kind of hard not to see anything but his dad there. Yeah, but it's a great issue. There's, again, always a lot going on. We're introduced to, Aunt May has her own side stories going on and her own love interest, and there's something that is really lost later on. This is kind of thing that tired me out in a lot of, like, more modern Spider-Man comics, like you've talked about. There really isn't the same emphasis in the supporting cast, and there's just mostly he's swinging into the open space that has an artist who's probably inspired by McFarlane, and they want to draw a lot of webs, and then he sees or hears an explosion or there's a bad guy, and they punch up for, like, I don't know, 10 of the pages, and then the bad guy gets away, and then Peter, like, is guilty, and then he finds them again and punches them until he's done. Like, there's so much about that kind of empty formula of the baddie of the week. And here, and not just this issue, but in many of the issues, just the way that Romita draws him swinging around the city is more carefree, and the sense of place is unmistakable. Almost, it appeals to your senses. Lots of great imagery, lots of great kind of low and high angles of again, bricks, and we're all over the place. We're high down to street level, down to sewer level. It just takes you through New York, and instantly from the first issue I'm reading here, like, even Peter's apartment, and he's just kind of sitting there partly in costume, and you get to see his place. I don't know. It feels like a lived-in world, and I want to join him. So, this is missing for me for a lot of more modern Spider-Man stuff.
I think there's a lot of other elements as well, like kind of going with what you mentioned. I think part of it is that this first issue, 238, the Hobgoblin himself is only really in 2 or 3 pages at the very end, which is very atypical because so the big villain, quote unquote, that's on the cover doesn't ever fight the hero. So there's a lot more pages that have to be filled with something. And so instead, as I said, like we get a lot more of the world and building the world and all these different things. And you have him just going up against some, random thieves, like it doesn't always have to be these bigger threats. Sometimes it's the more, down to earth threats, which is the most interesting. This also feels, this is the most natural way where you can have a comic where if this was their first Spider-Man comic, they've got it. They've got what they need. And it's not ham-fisted. I mean, you have, Peter thinking about Uncle Ben. So you have a little bit of his origin. So you have that kind of replayed. Like there's a few different things where you get a sense of the history that exists, but just enough to give you a taste and not overwhelm you with it, but also not too little that you feel like I don't know who these people are. So it's difficult to do that balance. But I think he does it so well that you've got everything you need and you don't feel like you're missing anything. Like you don't necessarily know where you're at in this soap opera, but it's telling you exactly what you need to know. This is where Aunt May is. This is where, he's still in school. Aunt May is, opening a boarding house. Like, okay, he's working at the Bugle. He's trying to.
This is his job. Yeah. He's got a rival. It's so packed. And this is like gotta be, I don't know, Marvel Comics at its best. Like Stern knows the history. And this is what when all throughout these issues, these storylines, we're constantly bringing things back like, oh, by the way, in Amazing Spider-Man 11, he used a spider sense tracker device. Okay. And then, by the way, here's the legacy of the Green Goblin, which he interweaves several times to people who might not have been there. So he's constantly referencing both characters and places and events. And some of it's minutiae. And so he's honoring the legacy and introducing new stuff and keeping the pace going quickly. And there's a mystery, and there's like lots of noir stuff. I love all of the shots and the shadows across each of these issues of someone staring out a window and there's blinds, and and the shadow of the blinds is like, stream across their face. I love a building top conversation. Peter's on top of multiple buildings. He's always kind of leaving his apartment and either getting caught or seeing it or just muttering to himself. And then there's all these like staring dramatically out of windows. Like, this is my jam. This is great.
In the second issue that we're talking about, which is, I guess, 239, what I find is so interesting about the first actual fight with the Hobgoblin is that very atypical for Spider-Man villains, the villain loses the first fight. Like, there's no, he gets a lucky win, and as you said, like, Spider-Man has to kind of figure out a way. He does lose that first fight. He's able to get away.
Yeah, he's like, I got lucky, yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of a really interesting approach that we have this new villain. We have this new, this villain who's kind of a remix of an old one, but he doesn't immediately win. He's not suddenly, he doesn't have super strength. He's winded. He feels like he's just been through the ringer. Like, that's what it should feel like to go up against a seasoned a seasoned superhero like Spider-Man, who's been doing this for a while and is used to trading punches with like big guys, that this guy's just a human. Like, he's not ready. And that's really refreshing that, they kind of go against type. And again, because the fight doesn't end up taking up too much of the page count, we get a lot of other things that we get to happen. We get to build up the suspense that someone's hitting all these Oscorp places and ransacking all these laboratories and leaving everything looking like they didn't steal anything. Like, that's a really cool subplot to kind of develop. You have Harry Osborn on the scene, trying to figure out what's going on. This book has so much to handle because Spider-Man's in the hospital because Felicia's there. So, like, Felicia's not really an amazing Spider-Man character at this point. She's more over in Peter Parker's Spider-Man, but there's obviously some crossover here. And like Jean DeWolf is also more of a spectacular character, but she's here too because Stern does like to use her. You have Madam Webb's here, like just in the hospital.
Yeah. Like, and she's like, I know something. You don't have your memories? Like, yeah, I don't have any memories of you, Peter Parker. I don't know who you are. And then that whole knowing I'm leaving the hospital thinking my secret's safe. And she's like, I'm Madam Webb. Like, that's fun. Really fun. Love the Felicia stuff. Love the dating stuff. I love this kind of moment where he's like, I don't really know who I'm into, and they keep trying to set me up with MJ again, but she turned down my proposal. Like, it's so pure soap opera. It's so good.
And like
I agree.
His rival's girl like wants to try and get with Peter because Lance isn't giving her the time, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's fun.
Which is fun. I do appreciate, and actually that does come to a head later, but I do appreciate, because we recently had the Clone Saga issues where we had that one shot in that super special where Peter's having a shower and we have like his bare ass, and here we get some more shower play that I'm sure Paul would love because Peter Parker stinks. But again, what I like about this kind of stuff, and we do see less of it in modern comics, we're in Peter Parker's mind. We get his thought bubbles matter. He's doing other activities. So all this stuff that could be so dry, just all the different thoughts and things he's going through in his head, we get to see he's been out for days. So now he's showering. So he's clean. He's shaving. He's cleaning his costume. Like, this is mundane stuff.
Yes, I like that.
It's intercut with all this monologuing about what's going on, what are my thought processes, and it's very natural. And it feels, again, it makes the world feel lived in. We're not just running from fight to fight, but we're actually living with the character.
And I like him. Like, that's also what's nice. Like, I like Peter here. It's really hard to read him in the pursuit and on the torment and all this other stuff. And it's just like, I feel so alienated from him. He's so unlikable. He's this man on the edge. And I get that it was the 90s and they're trying to compete against Image, but like, it was exhausting. It is exhausting. It can be. And this is, I mean, even just the colors alone. Who's the colorist here? Glennis Wein. Just really good colors mixed with Romita's penchant for great weather effects and water effects. It's cold early in the morning, and you can see the wisps of water vapor, right, coming out of their mouths. In the, like, was it second or third page. Even the second page, the splash is incredible starting splash page through a chain link fence, dividing up, the page as an Oscorp location is burglared, and then all the way through this, great weather effects and storms and rain, and even like the water scenes in the shower to the very end, like the coloration at the end when he's kind of like, oh, I guess I did a good job, or I'm still, not sure what I'm doing, just kind of walking again on a building. This kind of deep blue in the moonlight. It was so evocative. And you're right, all the great narration from Peter along the way. I feel like I'm along for the ride, and I really want him to win. I can't wait to see what's around the next corner. Who's he going to kiss? Who's he going to punch? Who's he going to, how's he going to screw up? He's going to say the wrong thing? But yeah, going back to your comments before, being reminded about how powerful he is and how smart he is. Stern is like, we're telling us when he gets into university conversations about his graduate degree later, people are like, Peter, you're really smart. Like, you really stand out. I don't want you to waste your gifts. And when he's futzing around with technology, he's like, oh, let's see if I am the genius they say I am. And he pulls it off even with fewer resources. And he's likable, and girls are into him. And he's like, oh, I'm not even really sure of myself. And they're calling him up and asking him out. And like, he's hanging out in the hospital watching over Black Cat, who can't wait to smooch him. And like, he's just, he's not always sure of himself, but he's like, he's a guy that you'd want to be friends with. And I just feel like that's been missing for so long for him. And this is the era, right? Where he's just, all the cylinders are firing. And I guess this is what, Quesada and others were lamenting, right, after he had been married to MJ for so long, that this is the fun, swinging, forget the pun, dating Peter that they wanted to either de-age or regress into, and they really didn't land it with One More Day. So I don't know. I don't know how you go back to this, right? They tried it with Ultimate Spider-Man, but he was too young, and Miles is also kind of in that teenage pocket. This early 20s Peter is kind of my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like there. What I think really stands out to me as someone who's read a lot of modern Spider-Man is that often, like, they just go too hard in on the jokes or him kind of being extra silly or extra weird and, like, almost Deadpool-ish at times. And, well, we have Deadpool for that. We don't need Spider-Man to do that. Whereas here, like, he'll crack jokes, but he's never silly. Like, he'll make a corny joke, but like I never roll my eyes at Peter as being a silly character. He'll make
he's sincere.
Comments, but he comes from a genuine place. When you're talking about the colorist, one thing that is really striking, and I actually prefer it when they do this, and I think Ron Frenz does a lot of this as well when he eventually puts his stamp on the character, is how often they have the Hobgoblin, his face is in the shadow of the cowl, and you just see those red eyes, right? Like, that is the most magnetic way you can make that character look. Like, he's got a cool visage anyway, like he's got a cool mask, but when you just see the shadow and you just see those red eyes peering out at you, that's so much more affecting.
Mm-hmm. And they do that with Magneto really effectively too at times, right? That's kind of a look, especially Age of Apocalypse Magneto and stuff like that. But there's something about a villain, where you can't quite see their face, just their mad eyes. Which I guess is interesting too, because that's Peter's face all the time in his mask, right? He's always enshrouded, but because it's usually colored in, it's got that bright poppy red. But just a black with red eyes is very sinister.
There's a shot in this issue where when Spider-Man kind of puts all his strength and grabs the glider and pulls it towards him.
I love that. Yeah.
That shot of him is such, even though it's not inked by John Romita Sr., it feels like a senior page. Like, that feels like the 60s Spider-Man, the musculature on his body as he's pulling it down, which is an awesome moment. Like, just taking Hobgoblin out of the sky. That's awesome.
And I love how he plants his feet, and it's like he's sticking with his feet, right, with his spider feet to the ground. So, like, the Goblin, ordinarily, like, Vulture will pick him up and carry him around, or a Goblin that will carry him around. But he's anchored, so it's just incredible, right? He just pulls him straight down to the ground. Boom, great automatopoeia, and then he's just kind of rolling off his glider, and he's thinking, no. Again, I really like all the emphasis on the thought bubbles for most of the characters. I really get annoyed. Maybe this is just a pedantic pet peeve of mine, but I don't like when characters are constantly talking through everything. I don't like when they're narrating I'm okay with someone is narrating in your own head. I'm like, I'm going to do this, and then I want to do that. But when characters are talking too much to each other, it kind of I don't believe it. Stern does a lot of work with thought bubbles, and I appreciate that about him, and Claremont too. When it's done well, it's really, really good. And these are the kind of comics that when people talk about how the narrative box has kind of killed the thought bubble, this shows, because Stern is using all of it. He's using all of the tools, including narrative boxes and thought bubbles, and they are better when used right than, I think, just narrating everything.
So when we jump to the next issue, which is 244, so we jump ahead 5 issues. In the interim, the love triangle between Bannon, Amy, and Peter, and then MJ showing up at the same time, that has been resolved now. So unfortunately, that part of the soap opera, you have to go back and experience that on your own.
But it begins with a splash of a smoochie, so it's just more soap operas anyway, right? Because then
that's true. Yeah, right into the black cat of it all.
Yeah, and you can see Klaus Janson here, so distinctly, there's such a change, right, in the inking.
A much thicker, deeper brush line. I don't want to say it's overpowering the art, but it's a lot stronger. It has a much bigger visual footprint or signature that it kind of puts on the page compared to the last 2 inkers, one of which was JR Sr., because they had a much lighter tone. They were not taking over from the line work, where I would say Jansen is doing a lot more of the heavier lifting and really having a thicker line, but it does work for the character. And his interpretation of Peter is a little broader. His hair is a little different. He looks a little different.
I love the inky blacks, though. When they do the noir stuff here, Jansen is the man. I mean, I'm looking towards the end of this issue where you've got the Hobgoblin, enshrouded in shadow, and there's that blind effect that I love so much. So when they're doing that, he is stronger than Romita Sr. But on the faces, not as good. MJ doesn't really look anything like MJ maybe has or does most of the time, which I can forgive. But the faces aren't as strong.
It's an interesting issue because there's not a lot of actual Hobgoblin in it, but again, it doesn't feel boring because there's a lot going on, and you're building up the tension that something's going on. All this equipment is, disappearing. These ransackings have continued. Peter's trying to figure out a way around it. The Hobgoblin is himself off the board on purpose because he got hurt the first time. So he's trying to think his way through and trying to figure out he needs to get these chemicals so that he can, rebuild the formula that gave the Green Goblin his strength so that he can actually go up against Spider-Man. So it's a subplot full issue. You're not getting a lot of action per se, although there is some, but it's a lot of fun and it didn't feel like it
is. Yeah. Yeah, the stuff at the university and the bureaucracy and Peter being a little stinker and playing a practical joke, that's really fun. Again, he's the kind of guy that I'd want to hang out with. It seems like that. And even the beginning of the issue where he's making out with Felicia in her hospital bed, and the nurse comes in and says, "Good morning, Miss Hardy. Time for your..." "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know." And Peter's just putting his mask back on. He's just like hanging out in the middle of the day, making out with a beautiful patient, and the nurse comes in. I love how the nurse is just kind of cool about it. She's like, "You have to excuse me, Miss Hardy. I'm not used to visitors coming and going by way of the windows. Hello, Miss Hardy, hello." And like Felicia's in her head about it. Like they're all, and even Peter, as he goes out the window, he's like, "I've got to take care of some business. If you and I are to have any chance of any kind of a future." So he's kind of like leaving a little breadcrumb trail there. He's like, "I'm not just here for macking on you. Like maybe we could, we could build something here together, but I got to take care of stuff because I got you in mind." Like it's just like a cute little romance thing happening here, and it's light and it's happy and it's fun. So it begins really strong, and that humor and that energy, that lightness continues throughout. So by the time we get to like the mystery, I'm not overburdened by dour, sadness and darkness. It's like it starts the light of the day, and now it's moving into evening, and then it moves or afternoon. And you follow them through the day, and the shadows get deeper. Like there's a sense of a continuity there. There's this diegesis, this diegetic kind of storytelling, and then you end up at a warehouse towards the end, and he's doing the old warehouse thing, and which is a typical Peter adventure. Even in the Spider-Man game, like, oh, there's some kind of kerfuffle at a warehouse, and you swoop down, and you sneak in, right? Like it's just, it's typical and yet also very fresh. Because it's doing things that are different. He's webbing up entire groups of people to save them from a fire and carrying them out. Meanwhile, Romita is just drawing the heck out of this escaping truck that has a secret van that rolls out the back of it and speeds away with dialogueless storytelling or with wordless storytelling. It's another great issue. Loved it.
And we do see here that we get to see the first name drop of Lefty Donovan, one of my favorite Hobgoblins.
Yes, you do in your trivia of the Hobgoblin. You've brought him up before, and now I finally got to read about Lefty.
Now, a big feature of this issue is the switcheroo. So, as a fan going into this, enjoying the story, did you see the switcheroo coming with the Hobgoblin actually being Lefty Donovan, and then Lefty getting a pretty rough defeat and then murder?
No, I don't think it's telegraphed for me. Is Lefty left-handed? Is that a thing I should be looking for? Because
I don't know.
With the chemical thing, he's pouring one chemical into the other, into the beaker, or whatever it's called, with the left hand. Is that the... No, I didn't see this as a clue. I didn't know that any other people had been empowered or oozed or had the chemical bath. And so when he gets hit with that horrific explosion and it's like pouring all over him and he's screaming, I guess I didn't really put together that would have been like really, like, I mean, I assume that this is going to affect his face or really severely injure him. But, if it is Roderick years later, when we see Roderick as the Goblin, he doesn't have these horrific scars. So I guess I just wasn't really thinking about that. All I really know is that I've learned that there's a lot of old switcheroos with the character. I know that things are getting changed depending on who the writer is. And Stern is thinking differently than DeFalco is thinking differently than Owsley. So I didn't even know at this point if Stern had decided on who the Hobgoblin was. But yeah, my assumption was that the narration as it is, or the story as it is, that I assume this is the real guy. So it was a switcheroo to me. But again, most of what I know about this character is that they keep pulling the rug out from underneath you. So it's not like I didn't go, oh, what? And get upset about it. I was like, yeah, this is kind of the deal.
So Stern has said that he knew already, like he had already introduced Roderick Kingsley in Spectacular Spider-Man. So in his mind, when he talks about it, he always knew like that was part of the reason that the Hobgoblin went to the effort of like, they even say, right, like he dyed the costume and he did this stuff and he's like a guy in fashion who was more used to these chemical processes would be more adept at being able to immediately like refashion the Goblin's outfit into something else using the same. So that's his idea. So that, does bear out that that's his original concept for who this was supposed to be. So as far as he was concerned, it was always going to be Roderick Kingsley.
I mean, he makes his own mask, right? It looks like he's making his own mold, pressing his own kind of like whatever latex mask into that, and then he's popping it open. So he has the kit for that kind of thing, which, yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of neat.
I think the tip off, when I read this again was when Lefty Donovan is getting the Hobgoblin armaments on. He's putting on the costume, and he puts on the sensor, and he's like, "Sensor must go into place. Important. I remember why." And that's kind of like the tip off. Like, yes, it could be the main Hobgoblin wanting to test his powers, but really, as we now know, it's actually the real Hobgoblin wanting to know how this Patsy fares, and the sensors are designed to do that.
It's interesting too, like this is all going on and it's interesting, but again, I'm more interested in the fact that like Betty comes in and is like, "Hey, I want to take you to dinner," and he's like, "Okay, cool," and then they just go to this pub and then MJ's there, right? And they're just like, "Oh, we're having dinner together," and he's like, "Oh man, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. I don't know how I feel sitting next to her," and then all of a sudden he's just like, "Oh, looking at her green eyes, I get lost in those green eyes," and she's giving me a little smile. Like this is the stuff that's like getting a lot of my too, right? So it is cool what's going on with the goblin, but then he's just like green eyes, just like Felicia's, just like the black cat, and then her face kind of smooshes or swirls into Felicia's. Although Felicia in this panel, and I think in the comics, is blue-eyed, isn't she?
I don't remember now.
I demand a no prize.
This is an interesting time too, because like this is Peter drops out of school. This is what created a lot of friction with him and his aunt. Like she's just like, "Why would you do that?" And she doesn't really understand. And obviously he's trying to figure stuff out, but also he's Spider-Man, so he's trying to figure out how to manage these things. And so this is someone of his age would have a problem with that. Like even his teachers who don't want to let him drop out of class, like if you just applied yourself more, he's like, maybe I'll be able to do that later, but I just can't do that now. Like he knows he has to buckle down, but also knows he can't. And obviously no one can know why he can't, and Spider-Man's always a big reason why. But again, that's the classic dichotomy of the character. And I forget who says it best, but someone did say that, the best Spider-Man story is where Spider-Man wins, Peter Parker loses. Or if Peter Parker wins, Spider-Man loses. Like that's the balance of the character that makes him so compelling, is often in order to get Aunt May's special medication, it means he has to let someone go. Like that there's always a push and pull, and that both sides of him can never be happy at the same time.
I think you introduced me to that quote, and I think at the time you told me that was Mark Waid.
Yes, I think that's probably right.
And also, there's an interesting throwaway line here, too, about, like, him white knighting. I don't know, is it this issue? It's either this issue or maybe it's the next issue where he's like, "Oh, by the way, Felicia's hospital bills are also going to be really expensive, so I'm going to try to sell more photographs to pay for them," which is also kind of, like, not his responsibility. So there's an interesting thing that he's like, apply yourself, do your schoolwork. And he's like, "No, I got to get myself my head screwed on straight and do some more work, and I pay the bills. I'll make sure my aunt's taken care of, but also I'm taking on the responsibility that Felicia never asked me to do. Girl can steal her own, doubloons and pay for her bills." So that's kind of a thing that, I don't know where that goes, but like to me, if I was maybe writing this, I'd go, that would be something Felicia actually wouldn't want him to do. And that would be a point of like friction. And it's just kind of suggesting more soap opera stuff. So yeah, all of these personal problems that I don't know what I'm doing really reminds me of one of the best things I love about Phil Urich's Green Goblin, the DeFalco's Green Goblin, where, he's around the same age as this. He's kind of more of a loser than Peter, but constantly the refrain, he doesn't have a catchphrase like everyone else is. His catchphrase is like, "So what the heck am I supposed to do now? I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Like that's a constant, it's very Peter Parker-esque about like, I don't know. There's no rule book for this. And, I'm kind of lost. So to see Peter making some choices that maybe I would disagree with, I was in my early 20s before. I feel this, very authentic.
What's interesting here is that we never actually see what Lefty Donovan looks like. Because it doesn't matter. Like we see, and maybe he is scarred from the explosion. We wouldn't know any better. And he does kind of say, like, even with your scars, I recognize your face. But we never see his face, which is interesting. Also, in the page where, he finally is kind of taken down, this is happening over a movie theater where they're showing Return of the Jedi, which is a nice little, a fun little thing there. But yeah, no, I like the idea that, when Peter finally is able to take him down and Lefty Donovan is like, what's going on? Like, he finally kind of, his personality comes through the conditioning that he was under, and Peter doesn't realize he's not the Hobgoblin until he smacks into that building. Like,
he also doesn't throw a pumpkin bomb with his left hand, so I don't know what to do about that. I think they should change that. But this panel of after a sniper takes a shot at him, the way Romita draws this, I just love this panel of the glider flying over to the sniper, just the fluid motion of it, the kinetic energy of it, grabbing them off the top of the building. This fight is great. This is a really fun fight. Having him pick up the giant dumpster or whatever this kind of container is and showing his super strength and throwing it at Peter and then Peter grabbing it and going on the corner and saving people's lives. This is so dynamic. This is wonderful. I love this fight. Great issue.
When you do have Peter grabbing Lefty Donovan, there's that one shot where they do kind of the inverted colors on Spider-Man's mask for no reason. Like, there's actually no reason to do it, where suddenly, like, the lines on Spider-Man's mask are red now, and it's like a black. It's almost like instead of being a regular red mask with the black lines, now it's inverted. I don't know why they did that, but it's really striking. Again, it's a fascinating choice. And again, just the moment of Lefty Donovan dying and Peter being like, he never had a chance. What's going on here? Who set him up? Like, who's the real Hobgoblin? Like, this is how you build a mystery. Like, it doesn't even need to be anyone. It's just the fact that we don't know who this guy is going to be. So we could be looking around any corner. Anyone could be the Hobgoblin.
Yeah. And then you change, you go change gears for a little bit, do a few more issues, doing some other stuff, which I haven't read yet. And then and it doesn't take too long to come back to this, right? It's not forever before we come back and we kind of pick up the mystery. So if I'm reading regularly this time, I'd be like, oh no, cool, another Hobgoblin issue. Like, yeah, let's get down to it, right? So, the pacing seems really good.
So 249, now we have Dan Green. Now he's doing finishes, not just inks. So he's doing a lot more of the heavy lifting than in theory he was, would have been happening before. And you feel that this does feel like less like JR. There's
absolutely
details of his. There are some moments, that first.
What a sexy splash page, though. This is soap opera. He's trying to get his undressed, and also the drama of being able to hide his costume, and then a beautiful bikini-clad woman walks in on him. We only find out like a panel or two later that, she doesn't have her glasses on, so she did miss the fact that, but also just the way, his abs are kind of crunching here. Like, everything's just very high octane, very kind of energetic, early 20-something dating life. So, really great beginning. I don't know how I feel about Romita's choice. I guess this is just the
Animal?
80s. An animal, a crop top, half top, and the short shorts, hey, I'm not, no body shaming Peter. He looks great. But, this is definitely an era, right, that is not, that missed me. Obviously I was a kid at the time. So maybe at the time this was like Peter being hip. I think he kind of looks like a dork, but maybe this is him being super hip. But yeah, they go to a party, a pool party, and of course MJ's there, and they're flirting. Even this panel of them embracing, like, it wasn't so long ago that she was kind of like going, I don't know, and don't set me in with Peter, and now he's like pulling her, they're pulling each other against each other, embraced, and people are walking by going like, what you got that I don't got, and throwing each other into the pool. It's very flirty, very fun. Yeah.
It's interesting because at this point we're about a year away from DeFalco changing everything when he reveals that MJ knows who Peter Parker is and that she knows his secret. Like, so obviously, like, Stern wasn't going to do that necessarily, but it's interesting that we're not that far away. She's now in the book again. She's more regular, and she's not his love interest, but she's the ex-girlfriend, and it's an interesting position for her to play. And it's interesting because people really don't like that these days, that MJ's around but like not his girlfriend. And I'm like, yeah, but they have done this before. Like, they almost got married, and then the character disappeared, and now she's back. And it does feel like that's what would happen in life, like, they obviously have a strong bond. They also went through, like, Gwen Stacy died. Like, that was a big deal, and they were friends at that time, and they bonded, over that trauma. So, like, it makes sense that they would kind of return back to each other and have this ease with each other. And even Peter's like, I never thought I could be at ease with her again, but I feel at ease with her. Like, she makes me feel good. So it's nice to see, this part of the relationship going. And then at this party, Harry gets some, blackmail material, and, that kind of gets the story really going on, that, and we have a nice kind of flashback to how the Green Goblin, kind of came to be and all the prior stuff. And so Harry has to really contend with the Osborn legacy, which is a huge part of his character. And now, obviously, he's already been the Green Goblin at this point. Like, it's already happened in his past. He had a mental break. Then his psychiatrist became a Green Goblin as well. And this is like him much, what's the word? Like, he's recovered a lot. Like, he's really put himself back together. It's actually sad because, as you said, like, things won't go well for Harry, and they end up very poor. But this is interesting to see him trying to, like, put the legacy of the Green Goblin and his dad behind him, and the Hobgoblin won't let that happen. And not only will he not let that happen for him, there's a whole throng of people that Hobgoblin's ready to blackmail.
Which is great because, again, there's that legacy stuff that Stern seems so good at, that he knows his stuff, or at least he's working very well with his editors. And J. Jonah Jameson, right? He's haunted by his own past, and there's that. Jameson is not an interesting character unless he has conflict, in my opinion. If he's just there to agitate Peter, if he's an antagonist only, a foil only, but has no real depth or character, I'm not really interested. So it is really nice to see him trying to be a good guy. And even Peter brings it up to him, like, you hate me because I'm a criminal, but you have behaved, you've done criminal things. Like, if people find out about this, you could go to jail. Like, you're a hypocrite. You're not a saint. And to see him trying to, like, write his own expose or his own kind of confession letter before he gets pasted by the Goblin, by the Hobgoblin is an interesting side story as well. But the fact that you're reminded, if you don't know, and if you're a new reader, he just says, by the way, there's a guy called the Scorpion. There is something called the Spider Slayers, and I might be inclined as a reader to go, oh, I want to go and read more about that. Like, this is really good storytelling and also really good universe building, or adding on to that universe. So I love all that. I like Liz. I haven't read a ton of stuff with Liz in it, but I like her. She seems like she's a good friend and a good partner, and he's worried about her husband, and then Peter gets to go have a heart-to-heart with his friend who rides away after he gets his blackmail letter. So again, more good character building and recapping the legacy of the Goblin. Yeah.
At the Century Club, when you have that moment where Harry Osborn, who's being threatened by the Hobgoblin, like, punches him and punches the head right off. Like, I really like that because it does accentuate the fact that, like, he was a goblin. He has, some demons inside of him, and then we see it's just a robot. And then there's a really interesting moment because you have a guy there, very nondescript, says, then the real Hobgoblin could be anywhere. He could even be one of us. And the next panel is Peter saying, I wouldn't bet the family jewels on that Kingsley. So this is Daniel Kingsley pretending to be Roderick, but we don't know that yet.
Oh, okay.
Because no one knows about Daniel.
And DeFalco wanted him to be the Rose, right? He wanted him to be Fisk's son.
He wanted Kingsley to be the Rose, and he wanted Richard Fisk to be the Hobgoblin.
Yeah, I really like Richard Fisk as the Hobgoblin. I really like that idea. I love that idea. That's my favorite version of the reveal.
He thought that Kingsley as the Rose made more sense because of the fashion, and he's always wearing that style. He's always looking fashionable. The Rose is always in a nice suit. He's got, like, the Rose mask, and he just thought that made more sense for him. That would be what Kingsley would look like. Now, obviously, that's not what ended up happening, but that definitely was his original interpretation because he didn't like the twin angle that Stern was going for. But ultimately, eventually Stern would come back and do Hobgoblin Lives, and so everything that he wanted got put back into place, and so that is canon moving forward. But it's interesting to see here. Now, that one shot after Peter has that thought about Kingsley, there's that beautiful shot of the Hobgoblin just breaking in through the window, and that's like probably one of my favorite shots of all these stories. There's just so much menace there, and he's just like, don't mess with this guy.
And 2 pages before that, the rendering of the Goblin mask. Incredible. Really nice rendering, very disturbing. And it's a robot, but, I mean, I'm imagining that this is the same mask that the actual Goblin wears, but even the teeth, down to the kind of the menacing maw. Like, really good art here, really good depictions of the Goblin, Hobgoblin.
I do also like, the Kingpin's there, and the Kingpin's like, I'm in no hurry to leave. Like, I'm interested in what's going to play out here. Like, he feels very, and it's interesting, seeing Kingpin, you start to see shades of what JR will do with Kingpin later. He's not fully developed his interpretation of the character yet, but you can start to see it.
Yeah, there's definitely a heft, there's a girth, there's kind of a weight that he draws him with, and even the way he kind of renders the joint of the neck to the head, he'll flesh out later. But this is nice proto Romita Jr. Kingpin.
And I like the idea here too that you have the Kingpin being like, I prefer to let you apprehend him. It's simply good business. Like he lets Spider-Man come too because he knows that it's the right thing for his business, which is interesting. And like as a kid, I think probably the first time I ever saw the Hobgoblin, he's working with the Kingpin in the animated series. So for me, those characters are always linked. So it's interesting to see them here.
Does he have Mark Hamill's voice in your head in the comics when he's talking?
No, he actually doesn't.
Yeah. I don't love it either. It's too close to the Joker for me. I just think of like I don't think of it as high pitched. I think of it as like I think it's disturbing to me to think of it as like a deeper, more baritone, like a regular guy's voice. And he's not doing a thing. He's not doing a voice to be goblin-y. I just think of him as this kind of, mercenary type, thug type character who's just, that's how I would like him to be portrayed. If they ever do a live action one.
You bring up an interesting moment with Jameson writing his confessional, and like that's the Jameson that I feel like Scott Lobdell was writing in Uncanny X-Men. Like the guy who's like dedicated to being a newspaper man and doing what the right thing is for the paper, even if he doesn't necessarily like it, and he's going to stick up for principles. And so he knows that this is the right thing to do. So even though the Bugle is his life, he's going to do the right thing to save the Bugle. The Bugle matters more than Jameson as a person. And I like that because it's showing that he's not all ego. And I definitely got that from reading Scott Lobdell when he wrote that one issue of, Operation Zero Tolerance and Uncanny X-Men, which featured Jameson, because he felt like that's the real Jameson. Like, there's a lot of really cool things about Jameson. Obviously, when he sees Spider-Man, he kind of turns red, or sees red, I should say, and he kind of throws some of that out the window. But I like seeing this aspect of him.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, he's compelling. I don't usually like Jameson, but this is fun. This is nice.
What I like, too, is that, when 250 ends, I mean, obviously it ends on a climactic moment of an explosion, but really the last page is all about Jameson. And again, such beautiful work here because you have the lines of the shades, cascading a shadow over Jameson's face. You can feel the heaviness of the moment of what he's about to do. It's palpable. Like there's just really something special about the art there.
250 is so good. I kind of want to find it. I don't know if I could track this down for a good price when we're doing our next comics trip, but like, I love the cover. I love the corner box so much. One of my favorite corner boxes ever. It's great. Steal it. Just steal this issue. That's a special normal size 250th issue. I love that too. Nothing double size about this one. So this is great. From the cover to the end, the art, the inking. Again, this is Jansen again. Let's see.
It is Jansen.
Yeah. You can see that in the way that he draws, especially the way that the rendering of Jameson comes across. Lots of nice, deep, dark inks. This is a lot of fun too. Again, the rooftop thing with the landlady. He's trying to sneak out, and you were highlighting the fact that he doesn't have his spider sense active right now. And so we're reminded of how much he relies on it. That's quite interesting. From combat to web slinging to height to realizing when he can emerge from behind something without being seen. It just keeps giving us more than just a mystery about a hobgoblin blowing up stuff. There's a lot going on here with like going from place to place and interviewing people, and even with Kingsley gets interviewed too, and he's like, oh no, I couldn't. He's fearful, he's terrified, so he's really selling it. A great funny moment of Peter popping out, talking to someone who's in the shower to ask if they know anything about the goblin and where he's at. And he keeps promising these different, I guess they're all financiers or they're millionaires of some kind. I can stop the blackmailing if you just tell me information about this guy. I can go after him, I can get him, and no one's willing to talk to him about it. Great page, and some more great storytelling when Peter's kind of struggling with his spider sense or lack thereof, swinging through the city. I paused on this. I kind of stayed on this page, just really appreciating Romita Jr.'s storytelling when he grabs onto a flagpole and kind of drops down these very vertical panels across the page as he's swinging or hanging above the city. And then leading up to, of course, this conversation you're talking about, it pays off towards the end with not JMS, with J. Jonah Jameson. Peter takes the page out and says, you're not writing this confessional. Maybe I'm crazy here to do this, but forget it. I'm going to take care of this. And then he just great silent panels of Jameson putting another page back in the typewriter and proceeding to write again anyway. He's as stubborn as anyone, and he's not going to be told what to do. So really good characterization. And then we get to Peter inventing or recalling his previous inventions and like saving the day through his mind, using technology to fight technology, and then track down the goblin and kick his butt. Really fun issue. Loved it.
What I do find interesting is that, again, if this was modern comics, 250 would have been like double, triple, quadruple size. They would have had backups in the end. It would have been the climax of the story. So it's so interesting here that the story runs from 259 to 251. Like, it's not over yet. We have this anniversary, well, not anniversary, but you know what I mean, like the 250 issue, but it doesn't mean anything because it's just a regular issue. And then we go on to the next. And with 251, first of all, I love that cover of Spider-Man's hand emerging from the water with the mask. I think is very strong, because if you're invested in this mystery, you're like, holy shit, we're going to find out who he is. Like, that's what your take is on this cover. So it's very evocative. Even the idea of the name of the issue being Endings and having that right on the cover, again, it really draws you in. You're like, oh man, this is the moment. And then it's interesting because it's not JR. Now we're getting Ron Frenz doing pencil breakdowns.
Ronald Frenz.
Klaus Janson on finished art. We have Tom DeFalco now scripting over a Roger Stern plot. And this issue is extremely dense, but it's very taut because a lot of it is this claustrophobic fight between Spider-Man and Hobgoblin. The Hobgoblin's doing everything he can to get away. They're in this battle van and they're just having fight after fight, and it really works for me. Like, I obviously the art's not going to be quite the same, and it is different, and you can see Ron kind of figuring it out. But I think the storytelling is very strong. You get a really, as I said, claustrophobic fight, which means every punch you can feel it more. There's no room to maneuver, so everything matters.
It's so kinetic.
Exciting.
It's so kinetic. It's like breakneck, constantly. Close-ups in people's faces, screaming, smashing windows, battle vans crashing into restaurants. Just, and it's surprising too. Like he again, this is maybe earlier Ron, but it nothing looks the same. Everything kind of, there's a surprise almost in every page. This is also a lovely issue. Again, I don't know how expensive they'd be, but getting original copies of these 3 issues would be nice. These are great Spider-Man comics.
I think it's possible. I don't think they'll be too expensive, depending if you want to get like reader copies.
Oh, this whole page, like smashing off the pier into the water, punching it up. Ron draws the crap out of this.
He does. And we have a great sequence afterwards, which is a nice quieter moment between Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson, because he's like, you don't have to do it. And Jameson's like, I already did it. Like, it's too late. Like, I already did the right thing. And like, even him like laughing at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man be like, why did you do this? How could you do this? And there's this great diatribe that Jameson does to be like, no, like, I love this newspaper. I won't ruin this newspaper for myself. And then I love that moment of like, he leaves and Peter's just like, congratulations. To Robbie.
To Robbie, yeah. Really good silent panels, or at least more visual storytelling from Friends. This almost is giving for me, like, it seems like Joe Bennett is almost inspired. I just see so much Joe Bennett in here in the way that Jameson is depicted, this kind of energy. I wouldn't be surprised if Bennett was inspired by Ron. Some really good stuff that does remind me of that other artist. Very deep reds at the end with the conversation between Peter and Harry. Peter's wearing glasses?
Yeah, I don't know where that came from or why he is wearing them there, but he is.
He looks so good. Look at this panel here. Look how good he looks. He looks like my cousin. My cousin's a really good-looking guy. He reminds me of him. Just the way the hair's all tousled and the glasses. This is great.
Yeah. No, as we're reading this, really nice kind of moment with him and Harry talking about what just happened and the knowledge about, what Harry has to do to kind of move on. Did you know that we were about to run into Secret Wars? Did you know that this was?
No. I'm like, well, the only clue I had is that I know that Ron draws the black costume. So the fact that Ron, is this Ron's first like Spider-Man issue in his run?
Yes, he had done a backup in Amazing Spider-Man. In one of the issues we skipped, that was actually a Thunderball issue. He did the backup, which was The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, which is one of the most famous Spider-Man stories now by Roger Stern. All about the young kid who has a terminal illness that Peter goes and visits and eventually reveals his identity to. So he had done that already, but this is the beginning of him actually on Spider-Man.
Yeah, so after I saw this, and then it's like, oh, it's Secret Wars, I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. And then on Marvel Unlimited, it's like next issue, like, oh yeah, next issue, here's the black costume. Of course it's the black costume. So I wasn't anticipating it, but it's nice to situate that in my mind now to see where Peter was just before that happened, and now he's black costume Spider-Man. So the Hobgoblin storyline was the last story before his costume change. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And again, we'll have the return of the Hobgoblin not that many months later, but, now it's going to be written by Tom DeFalco and it's drawn by Ron Frenz, and it is going to be different and it's going to feel different. And it's going to be, I would say, the difference is that he starts to become more of a collaborator. So Hobgoblin becomes involved with the Rose. So they're working together. So there's less of here, the Hobgoblin is the man, right? Like he is the main instigator. He doesn't work with anybody. People work for him or they die. And so after this, he kind of goes through a bit of a change where he becomes more of a collaborator with other people, and to some eyes, somewhat diminished as a character because it's just different. I'm not saying for better or for worse. I'm just saying it is a different interpretation of the character that is a little bit different from where we had been with Roger Stern.
Well, I hope to revisit that with you then and then do a comparison between DeFalco and Stern.
I mean, it's all good. It's a lot of fun. I mean, what Tom really brings is trying to develop new characters. He wants to bring in new concepts and not just use old things. So you have characters that he creates, like the Black Fox, like Silver Sable, like the Puma, like all these characters he starts to create. Those are all new concepts for the book and not just recycling old ideas.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm interested to read more. You've given me the Hobgoblin itch.
So I highly recommend you keep reading if you can, because it is a lot of fun. Black Costume Spider-Man does hit a little different. I would almost say go back and read some more of the Roger Stern stuff that we kind of skipped over because there's some fun stuff in there. But in general, like the Roger Stern and then Tom DeFalco period is a lot of fun in general. There's a lot of subplots. There's a lot of the soap opera elements. There's characters going in and out, the world feeling lived in. I do think that starts to change when Michelini takes over, for better or for worse. He's also dealing with, so what I've always felt about Michelini, and again, this is for better or for worse, he tailors his writing and his plots more to the strengths of his artist, which is a good thing as a collaborator, but Spider-Man as a book starts to feel very different because now McFarlane's drawing it, so the stories change to fit McFarlane. And then Larson's drawing it, so the stories shift to match Larson. And then same thing with Bagley. So all throughout that Michelini run, which is like 100 issues or close to, I would say the feel of the book becomes less concrete because it's more molded by who's drawing it. Whereas when you have Roger Stern and Tom DeFalco, I think there's a little bit more of a steady edge or steady grip on it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, thanks for introducing me to these stories. I think it was a great idea to talk about them. Something about this time of year too. I don't know. Maybe it's just the October Hobgoblin feel. It just feels like kind of autumn is a good time to read these. So it felt right.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time and reading these books on short notice. I was hoping you would enjoy them, and I'm glad that you seem to have done that, so that's great. If for those listening, you can email us at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. We have some great episodes coming up in the next few weeks, more interviews, so I'll actually keep those close to the vest and keep glued to the feed, and you'll get some good stuff all throughout October. So thanks again.
Keep guessing.
Exactly. Right. Just like the Hobgoblin, I'm going to keep you guessing on the identity of the next few interviews. But thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.